Deep in the jungles that today extend across Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador, a civilization was born among roots and stars. The Mayans, masters of time, architects of the soul, and heirs of the gods, erected impossible cities and deciphered the sky with a precision that still thrills us today. Their history is a symphony of splendor, mystery, and resilience, woven with blood, stone, and fire. This documentary is a journey through time, an odyssey that explores the dawn of an ancient culture, its glorious heyday, its painful fall, and its indestructible legacy. Because the Maya didn't disappear, they transformed. And today, their voices still murmur among the leaves, waiting to be heard once more. Long before cities, temples, or named gods existed, the lands of Mesoamerica breathed to the rhythm of the jungle. Thick green curtains hid the secrets of time, while small groups of hunters and gatherers learned to navigate among treacherous roots and skies shattered by thunder. They were men and women of clay, hunger, and intuition, forged by rain and sun, who would slowly begin to tame the world around them. It wasn't a violent or swift conquest. It was a patient transformation. The discovery of corn marked a before and after. That golden grain, which sprouted miraculously from the fertile soil, became more than food. It was a symbol, a myth, and an origin. The ancients believed that the gods had molded humankind from corn, and therefore, cultivating it was almost an act of sacred reverence. Dependence on corn led to the first villages. Men who had previously wandered aimlessly now built mud and straw huts near the fields. Women cared for the plants as if they were children, and children learned from a young age that the sky had cycles and that each one was linked to corn. Thus, a new relationship with time was born, one measured not in days, but in harvests and rainfall. Over the years, the simple village transformed into a community, then into a settlement, and finally into something more, a ceremonial center. Those who grew corn also began to wonder where the stars came from, why lightning flashed, or who spoke through the thunder. Shamans, sages, and storytellers of the invisible emerged, and with them, the first temples were born, small stone structures oriented toward the sun, the cosmos, and the gods. The jungle, initially an enemy, became an ally and teacher. Caves were seen as portals to the underworld. Cenotes were sacred eyes through which the gods looked out. Every tree had a spirit, every animal a message. This worldview permeated all aspects of life, and soon, every human action was interpreted as part of a universal balance. Nothing was a coincidence. Everything had a purpose. But the story was just beginning. That handful of villages hidden among roots was destined to become one of the most astonishing civilizations of the ancient world. Not for its wars, but for its wisdom. Not for its gold, but for its ability to observe the sky and translate it into stone and ceremony. Because the Maya, from the beginning, understood something essential. Time is not a straight line, but an eternal circle. And so, among cenotes and constellations, a vision of the world was born that still throbs beneath the foliage today. But that was just the beginning. At the dawn of the second millennium BCE, something extraordinary began to emerge from the mists of the jungle. Small Mayan communities, united by corn, the gods, and the sky, began to multiply and organize around new centers of power. Over time, these villages gave way to the first kingdoms, ceremonial centers where religion, politics, and astronomy wove the foundations of an unparalleled civilization. Spiritual leaders were transformed into priest-kings, sacred figures who spoke in the name of the gods and ruled over men and women as emissaries of the universe. In these new centers, such as Nakbe and El Mirador, the first imposing pyramids rose, slicing into the sky like stone spears. From their heights, The priests read the firmament and dictated the rhythms of life and death. El Mirador, with its monumental structure known as La Danta, became one of the most colossal complexes of antiquity. Vast in volume even than the pyramids of Egypt, La Danta was not just a temple. It was a declaration of power, wisdom, and connection with the cosmos. Its walls told stories that only the wise could interpret, and its steps were traversed by pilgrims seeking answers beyond the visible. In these early cities, architecture was not an aesthetic whim, but a reflection of the universe. Each stone was placed with a celestial purpose. The Maya would align their temples with the solstice, the equinox, the movement of Venus, or the moon. Nothing was left to chance. And those who managed to read these celestial messages became the guardians of the people's destiny. Politics also began to intertwine with the spiritual. Royal lineages were legitimized through mythical genealogies, which connected them to the creator gods. Power was no longer just a matter of strength, but of knowledge. And in this combination of wisdom and sacred leadership, the first dynasties were born, which would rule the Mayan territories for centuries. As the forest became a silent witness to this transformation, paths began to intertwine. Trade, pilgrimage, war, and alliance routes emerged. Jade, obsidian, cacao, and quetzal feathers began to circulate, carrying not only wealth, but also ideas, myths, and languages that would build the common soul of a diverse people unified by faith and knowledge. Thus, the Mayan world left its infancy behind. Cities grew, the gods multiplied their names, and humans learned to measure the universe with astonishing precision. But what would come next would surpass all imagination. Around 250 AD, a new era began to dawn over the Mayan temples. It was the beginning of the Classic period, an age of splendor, creativity, and expansion that would transform the Maya into one of the most advanced civilizations on the planet. Their cities grew like constellations on Earth, their temples pierced the sky, and their sages wrote history on stone and bark paper. Cities like Tikal, Calakmul, Copan, Palenque, and Caracol emerged as independent powers, ruled by royal dynasties that forged alliances, waged wars, and built monuments in honor of their gods and ancestors. Each city-state was a universe unto itself, with its own calendar, its own pantheon of gods, and its own vision of the cosmos. Tikal, in the heart of the Petén region of Guatemala, became the spiritual and political epicenter of the Mayan world. Its temple fort, more than 70 meters high, rose above the jungle like a stone beacon. From its summit, priests observed the movement of the stars, while kings conducted ceremonies seeking divine favor for their crops and armies. During this golden age, the Maya refined their hieroglyphic writing system, carving the most important events of their reigns into stelae and codices. More than 800 glyphs shaped a visual and phonetic language that allowed them to narrate wars, alliances, births, eclipses, and offerings in detail. Time was no longer just measured, but narrated. Architecture reached prodigious levels. Temples, palaces, and observatories were designed with impressive mathematical precision. Each building responded to a cosmic purpose, a celestial alignment, a sacred ceremony. The city was not an urban space, it was a reflection of the universe, a microcosm representing the planes of heaven, earth, and the underworld. During this period, the Maya not only observed the sky, they understood it. They knew that Venus had a 584-day cycle, that eclipses followed repetitive patterns, and that time itself was cyclical. It wasn't destiny they feared, but disharmony. Therefore, everything had to be in balance. Rituals, dates, sacrifices. Nothing was left undone. And as their cities shone and their science flourished, the Maya seemed to have achieved an unprecedented connection between humanity and the gods. But even the most radiant splendor can hide shadows, because on the horizon, something was beginning to crack. While the Mayan cities rose majestically in the midst of the jungle, another art form flourished in silence, carved with patience and fervor on limestone and tree bark. It was writing, the language of the gods. Mayan glyphs were not simple drawings. They were powerful symbols, capable of capturing time, memory, and destiny. More than 800 symbols comprise this complex hieroglyphic system, which the Mayans mastered with unparalleled skill. Each stela, erected in a ceremonial plaza, was more than a monument. It was a chronicle of the universe. Its bas-reliefs recorded the exploits of kings, sacred wars, dynastic alliances, and future eclipses. There was no written word that was not connected to the calendar, to the sacred cycles of the cosmos. For the Maya, writing was a way of ordering the universe and perpetuating divine will. The codices, made from fig bark paper, were living books. They contained ritual calendars, medical treatises, prophecies, and star charts. They were so precious that only the most skilled scribes and priests had access to them. In their hands, ink and brush became tools of divination, instruments for deciphering the flow of time and the designs of the afterlife. For centuries, this system remained an indecipherable enigma for the modern world. It wasn't until the 20th century that linguists and archaeologists began to understand its phonetic and grammatical structure. They then discovered a vibrant history, rich in human details, passions, tragedies, and glory. A history where every city had a voice and every king a name carved for eternity. Writing was also a political weapon. Rulers used it to legitimize their lineage, to proclaim their connection to the gods, to intimidate their enemies. Each glyph could be a sentence, a threat, or a promise. Written language was as sacred as a sacrifice, as definitive as a total eclipse. It was, in essence, the living memory of a civilization. But with the arrival of oblivion, many codices were destroyed. Future conquests and the fires of intolerance would burn irreplaceable pages. Still, what survived has been enough to reconstruct a part of the Mayan soul. Their words, hidden in moss-covered stones, still whisper in the humid jungle. And as the wise men recorded history with hands trembling with reverence, the heavens continued to revolve above their heads. Because for the Maya, writing was only part of something larger, understanding time itself. And that mystery leads us to their next great legacy. Nowhere in the ancient world was time venerated with such devotion as among the Maya. It was not a practical measure, but a divine force, a living entity that had to be understood, respected, and appeased. Time was cyclical, eternal, a sacred spiral that governed the destiny of men and gods alike. Therefore, its study was not a matter for philosophers, but for priest astronomers. The Maya developed not one, but several calendars, each with a specific spiritual purpose. The 365-day Hab guided the seasons and agricultural labor. The 260-day Tzolkin marked sacred days, ceremonies, and births. The combination of the two generated 52-year cycles, known as the calendar round. But even more impressive was the long count calendar, designed to record entire eras, with dates stretching back centuries before the birth of their own ancestors. This system was so precise that it still amazes modern astronomers and mathematicians. They predicted eclipses, knew the exact motions of Venus, and constructed tables that predicted celestial alignments without the need for telescopes. Most astonishing was their understanding of the concept of zero, something other civilizations hadn't even conceived of. This revolutionary discovery allowed them to perform complex calculations and build structures perfectly aligned with the firmament. Calendars also influenced politics and warfare. Dates for coronations, battles, and sacrifices had to coincide with specific moments in the divine cycle. Everything was connected. Nothing should happen out of time, because breaking the harmony was an offense to the gods. And when that happened, drought, disease, and chaos descended upon the land as inevitable punishment. The priests were the guardians of time. From the tops of their temples, they spent entire nights observing the stars and recording their trajectories. Their rituals were exact, timed with rigorous discipline. Every ceremony, every dance, every sacrifice had its precise moment. Like cogs in a cosmic gear, they kept the universe turning according to divine order. This mastery over time wasn't a simple obsession. It was a way of existing, of relating to the world. For the Maya, understanding time was understanding the soul of the universe. Each day was a god, each number an entity, each cycle a story repeated in eternal recurrence. But in a civilization that predicted everything, there was something they didn't see coming. A crack opened beneath their feet, invisible at first, but growing deeper. And soon, everything would change. To understand the Maya, one must look to the sky, but also to the interior of the earth. Their worldview was a complex network of divine planes, where reality was divided between heaven, earth, and the underworld, known as the upper world, the middle world, and Xibalba. These three worlds were not separate, but united by the sacred axis of the universe, the Ceiba, the great cosmic tree. In the Mayan world, everything was alive: stones, rivers, stars, animals. Each element had a spirit, a purpose within universal balance. Therefore, rituals were essential. They were acts to maintain cosmic order, to appease the gods, to guarantee life. And the most powerful of all these rituals was the blood sacrifice. Blood was a vital energy, a bridge between the human and the divine. Kings, considered children of the gods, pierced their tongues, ears, and genitals, dripping their blood onto papyrus, which was then burned so that the smoke would carry their offering to heaven. On more solemn occasions, human sacrifices were performed. These were moments of supreme communion, where the heart of a warrior or a prisoner was offered to the gods as a symbol of renewal. The major Maya gods reflected this duality between creation and destruction. Itzamna was the creator god, lord of the sky. Chaak, the rain god, brought fertility or drought. Kawil represented dynastic power. But perhaps the most venerated was the maize god, Hunhunapu, whose death and resurrection symbolized the eternal agricultural cycle of life and death. At the top of the temples, rituals were performed before crowds. The music of drums, the smoke of copal, and chants in sacred languages filled the air. It was a spiritual symphony in which the people participated not only as witnesses, but as part of a universe that must be maintained in harmony. If the gods were not honored, the forest itself would become an enemy. These beliefs were not mere superstitions. They were deep structures of thought, sustained by centuries of observation, mythology, and oral tradition. Laws, calendars, warfare, and education were based on them. The Maya lived to maintain balance, but when that balance began to break, the gods' response was silence. And that silence, despite attempts to break it with blood and prayers, marked the beginning of the end. At the end of the 8th century, temples still stood majestically, cities roared with life, and priests continued to watch the sky for signs. But beneath that appearance of splendor, something was beginning to break. The forest, once an ally, began to turn hostile. The rains stopped coming. The corn didn't sprout as it had before. The balance that had sustained an entire civilization for centuries was beginning to crack. The change wasn't immediate. It was a slow, almost imperceptible decline, like a silent illness that progresses without fever. Droughts were prolonged, harvests failed. The water canals, meticulously designed by the Maya, were unable to supply the increasingly crowded cities. Hunger began to spread, first in the villages, then in the cities. And with hunger came fear. The gods, who for centuries had been benevolent, now seemed silent. The priests intensified the rituals. Human sacrifices increased. New, higher, bloodier altars were erected. But the rains did not return. The sky remained motionless, impassive to the supplications and the dances. Many began to wonder if the gods had left, or if they had been betrayed. Desperation gave way to conflict. Alliances between cities fractured. Former allies became enemies. Cities like Tikal and Calakmul, which once shared knowledge and trade routes, now faced off in bloody wars over increasingly scarce resources. Warfare, which in ancient times was ritual, became a necessity. Royal bloodlines also began to falter. Kings who couldn't bring rain were deemed unworthy. People began to waver, to rebel. Power became decentralized. Great capitals, unable to sustain themselves, began to be abandoned. The jungle began to reclaim what had once been its own. Roots split the walls. Dampness erased the glyphs. Oblivion advanced with the same force as the jungle. And although some tried to resist, the power structures collapsed one after another. There was no great final battle. There was no foreign invasion. Only the sum of many internal wounds, many unanswered prayers, many seasons without rain. The Mayan world didn't fall from a single blow. It fell from exhaustion. But even when all seemed lost, a new spark began to ignite in the shadows. The once glorious cities were covered in silence. Tikal, Copan, Palenque, names that once resonated with power and wisdom, now lay in ruins. Their temples were devoured by vines. Their plazas were overgrown with moss and oblivion. But the Mayan civilization, like a flame that refuses to be extinguished, did not disappear entirely. Deep in the jungle, Mayan culture mutated, resisted, and waited. Thus began the post-classic period. It was not a glorious renaissance, but rather a period of transformation. The great metropolises gave way to smaller but resilient cities. Among them, two rose as new beacons in the darkness: Chichen Itza and Mayapan. These cities, although less monumental than their predecessors, were able to adapt to a new political, economic, and religious order. Chichen Itza became the heart of this new era. Its temples and plazas, influenced by northern cultures such as the Toltecs, displayed a distinct aesthetic, characterized by the serpent god Kukulkan. This figure of dual origin represented knowledge, war, and rebirth. His presence reflected a new religious syncretism, a fusion of beliefs that enabled cultural survival. The architecture of this period maintained the celestial symbolism, but with a different function. The Temple of Kukulkan, with its interplay of light and shadow during the equinoxes, became a monumental sundial. Despite the scars of the past, the Maya continued to look to the sky. They continued to wonder about the designs of the gods. And in every stone, in every ceremony, they kept alive the memory of what they once were. But the threat no longer came from the sky or the earth. It came from the sea. New ships appeared on the coasts, bringing men clad in iron, armed with gunpowder and a thirst for conquest. The Spanish weren't just seeking gold, they were seeking souls. And in their crusade, they would destroy everything they didn't understand. Still, the Maya didn't give in easily. For centuries, they resisted. They hid in the jungle. They attacked in the shadows. They founded hidden kingdoms like Tayasal, a fortress in the middle of Lake Peten Itza, where life continued according to the old ways. While the world changed, they continued to carve gods and speak the Mayan language. And although the end seemed imminent, the resistance was just beginning. The 16th century brought with it a brutal change, a tide of iron, disease, and ambition that would sweep across the continent. The Spanish conquistadors, led by men like Pedro de Alvarado, stormed into Mayan lands with a mixture of religious fear and an insatiable desire for power. For them, the temples were heresy, the languages, blasphemy, the codices, witchcraft, and so the sacred was burned. But the Maya were not an easy people to subdue. Unlike other empires, their decentralized structure made absolute control difficult. Each community had its own form of resistance. Some offered temporary alliances. Others fled into the depths of the jungle. Still others fought to the death. The conquest was not a short campaign. It was a war that spanned centuries. Tayasal, for example, held out until 1697. On its walls, Mayan warriors watched the horizon, knowing that each day could be their last. But they also knew that each day of resistance was a victory. Meanwhile, in the hidden temples, priests continued performing rituals. Elders taught children the stories of their ancestors. The language was still spoken. Identity was maintained at a simmer. The Spanish, with their cross and their sword, destroyed codices, stelae, and temples. But they couldn't erase the memory. They couldn't erase the worldview that lived in every word, in every ceremony. Because being Maya wasn't just belonging to a culture, it was being part of a universe. And that universe, though wounded, didn't surrender. Throughout time, rebellions, insurrections, and wars occurred. The Maya fought for their land, their language, and their right to exist in their own time. During the caste war in the 19th century, they took up arms once again, demonstrating that their warrior spirit still throbbed. Even today, their descendants continue to defend their rights, their wisdom, and their worldview. And so, the civilization that many believed had vanished lived on, not in moss-covered pyramids, but in hearts that still refused to forget. Because for the Maya, resistance was a sacred act, and what remained to be discovered would be the ultimate proof that his legacy would never die. Today, centuries after the collapse of their cities and the arrival of the conquistadors, the Maya are still here, not as ghosts of the past, but as living, vibrant people who inhabit the mountains, jungles, and cities of Mesoamerica. Millions of people speak Mayan languages, practice ancestral rituals, and keep the memory of their ancestors alive in every word, every celebration, and every seed planted. The temples of Tikal, Chichen Itza, Palenque, and Copan are now tourist destinations, visited by fascinated travelers. But for the descendants of the Maya, they are not ruins, but sacred spaces, sites where the voice of the gods still resonates, where calendars continue to turn, where time has not died, it has only transformed. Mayan astronomy continues to amaze scientists. Their timekeeping systems, based on millimeter-precise celestial observations, remain a source of study and wonder. Their understanding of the Venus cycle, the solstice, and eclipses was so precise that many wonder how such knowledge was possible without modern instruments. The surviving codices, though few, still hold secrets. Every symbol yet to be translated holds a promise of discovery. Every fragment of text is a story waiting to be told. The jungle itself, which once devoured the cities, now holds the last secrets of this civilization. And every year, new archaeological discoveries rewrite what we thought we knew. But beyond the stones, the true Mayan legacy is spiritual. It's a way of seeing the world, based on balance, respect for nature, and connection with the cosmos. In a modern world that often forgets its roots, Mayan wisdom reminds us that everything is connected. That time is not a race, but a cycle. That life is sacred. And as long as there is a child who learns a Mayan language, a woman who passes on an ancestral recipe, a grandfather who tells a myth under the starry sky, the Mayan civilization will live on. But this story isn't over yet. While the modern world rushes forward, satellites and highways, deep in the jungle, covered by centuries of leaves, roots, and silence, lie forgotten cities. We're not talking about scattered ruins or solitary temples. We're talking about true Mayan metropolises with ceremonial avenues, observatories, ball courts, and hidden pyramids. as if the earth itself had sought to protect them from oblivion. Some have yet to be touched by the steel of excavation. Archaeologists, armed not with spears, but with drones and LiDAR technology, have begun scanning the vegetation cover of Guatemala's Petén and the Yucatan Peninsula. What they have found is astonishing. Beneath the thick greenery, a network of interconnected cities slumbered, with complex hydraulic systems, causeways, and plazas, where thousands of people once held ceremonies under the stars. Each discovery is a page rescued from a lost book. A city like El Zotz, which seemed minor, revealed a pyramidal temple aligned with the winter solstice. Another site, Holmul, revealed a wall painting depicting a coronation scene, intact after 1,000 years. It is details like these that allow us to reconstruct history with archaeological excitement, piece by piece, like an ancient puzzle. But these sites are not just architectural evidence, they are time capsules. Within them are remains of ritual pottery, obsidian tools, jade jewelry, and even royal burials that still retain their mystery. Each object found tells a story, an everyday gesture, a farewell, a victory, a prayer lost in the night. The jungle, in its dense embrace, has been as destructive as it is protective. While it claimed many cities, it also kept them secret. And now, slowly, it is giving them back. But with each structure discovered, a deeper question also emerges. How many civilizations are still unknown to us? How many lives, kingdoms, and thoughts have been erased without a trace? As these hidden cities come to light, so does a new way of viewing the past. It's no longer a linear history, nor a tale of ruin. It's a story of transformation, of continuity. Because the Maya never stopped building, they just changed how and where they did it. And while archaeologists clear land inch by inch, the jungle, silent and wise, still holds its most jealously guarded secrets. The Mayan world, although deeply spiritual, was also a world of war. City-states, competing for control of lands, trade routes, and divine legitimacy, waged battles that were both earthly and ritual. Their armies marched not only for territorial conquest, but for cosmic balance. Mayan wars were sacred wars, and each battle was a dialogue between the gods. Mayan warriors were trained from childhood, not only in the use of weapons like the spear, the atlatl, or the obsidian knife, but also in reading signs, the meaning of dates, and the omens of dreams. Because for the Mayan, going to war was fulfilling a heavenly mandate. There was no glory without blood, nor victory without ceremony. Every battle was preceded by rituals, fasting, and consultations with calendars. It was believed that only on the right days did the gods bless the fight. The most valuable loot was not gold, nor even land, but captives. For the prisoners would be sacrificed, offered to the sun, the corn, the rain. War fueled religion, and religion legitimized war. Chronicles from cities like Yaxchilan and Dos Pilas recount epic clashes between rival dynasties. Sculpted stelae depict kings with their feet on the defeated, depicting humiliated captives, bound and ready to be delivered to the altar. This wasn't just political dominance, it was a reaffirmation of the sacred order. But there were also alliances. Marriages between royal houses of different cities created complex diplomatic networks. A prince of Copan could marry a princess of Calakmul, and in doing so, temporarily unite two warring worlds. These alliances, however, were fragile. All it took was a drought, a bad omen, a betrayal to unleash a new war. Battlefields were not open plains, but dense jungles with hidden routes and ambushes. Mayan warfare was about precise movements, brief, violent clashes, where knowledge of the terrain was key. Victory was not always measured in territory conquered, but in prestige, in captures, in glory inscribed in stone. and as the sun blazed down on the red-painted wooden shields, the gods watched from above. For with every drop of blood spilled, the ancestral pact between heaven and earth was renewed. But there were still other powers that would sustain the Mayan world from the shadows. Every Mayan city was a living organism, not just a collection of temples and plazas, but a complex system of political, economic, religious, and social functions. At its center beat the ceremonial heart, where temples and palaces formed a constellation of power. Around this nucleus extended the neighborhoods of artisans, farmers, and merchants. And beyond, the jungle, ever-present, ever-looming. Palaces were not mere residences. They were centers of government, living archives where events were recorded, councils met, and wars were planned. In their courtyards, disputes were adjudicated, nobles were educated, and codices were read. There, priest-kings exercised power not as lords, but as administrators of divine order. Ceremonial plazas were the main stage for cosmic drama. Ritual dances, ball games, and processions took place there. The ground in these plazas was aligned with the movements of the sun. Every shadow, every ray of light on certain days had a meaning. The city spoke through its architecture. Artisans were essential. They didn't just produce pottery, tools, or textiles. They were interpreters of the cosmos. Each vessel could contain a mythological scene, each mask an invocation. Mayan art wasn't decorative. It was functional, spiritual, narrative. It was a way of keeping history alive and communicating with the gods. The city was also an economic hub. Markets, though often ephemeral, brought together merchants from distant regions. Products arrived from the highlands, the coasts, and central Mexico. Cacao served as currency. Jade beads were status symbols. Wealth was measured in both goods and knowledge. Sacred paths, called Sac Biob, connected temples and neighborhoods, but also cities. They were elevated white limestone routes that symbolized purity, order, and connection to the spiritual world. Walking along them was like participating in a ritual. It wasn't a simple journey. It was a symbolic journey. And so, each Mayan city was a miniature universe, a replica of the cosmos, where everything was measured, thought out, aligned. A heart that beat to the rhythm of the gods and the people. But even the strongest heart can be silenced by uncertainty. Among the many practices that defined the Maya, the ball game holds an enigmatic place. It was not a simple sport. It was a ritual of life and death, a cosmic ceremony that represented the eternal struggle between light and darkness, between the gods of the underworld and the heroes of heaven. Each match was a microcosm of sacred mythology. The courts were located in the heart of the city, near the main temples. They were elongated enclosures with sloping walls, where players, dressed in ceremonial and protective clothing, hit a solid rubber ball using only their hips, elbows, and thighs. The heavy, fast-moving ball represented the sun, and its movement was followed with religious fervor. Teams were formed by warriors, nobles, or prisoners. The match tested not only physical skill, but also spiritual endurance. Often, the losing team, or even the captain, was sacrificed in the temple. Dying in the game was considered an honor, a direct passage to the world of the gods. It wasn't defeat, it was transcendence. The game also had political implications. It was used to seal alliances, settle disputes between cities, or demonstrate superiority. Sometimes, a war was decided not on the battlefield, but on the ball court. It was a way to reduce bloodshed and, at the same time, honor the gods with a worthy sacrifice. Many reliefs depict scenes from the game: decapitated heads sprouting snakes, players in a trance, priests watching from above. The symbolism was profound. Every point scored, every move, had a mystical meaning. It wasn't played for fun. It was played for the balance of the world. Even today, in some indigenous communities, The game has survived in traditional forms. It is a living heritage that defies time. And although its exact rules have been lost, its spirit still lingers, like an echo of ancient celestial battles. Because in the Mayan world, even the simplest game could be a dance with destiny. Among all the beliefs, rituals, and structures of the Mayan world, none was as central as corn. This golden grain not only nourished the body, it nourished the soul, history, and myth. For the Mayans, human beings were created from corn. This is how sacred texts, like the Popol Vuh, narrated it. Therefore, each seed was a particle of divinity, each harvest a renewal of life. The agricultural cycle of corn governed the calendar, religion, and politics. Sowing was not a simple task. It was a ritual act. Fields were blessed, spirits invoked. The days for harvesting and planting were carefully chosen according to the stars. Corn was born amidst songs, offerings, and fire. It was a child of heaven. In their homes, women ground the grain from dawn. They prepared tortillas, tamales, and atoles. Each food item was offered before being consumed. The first bite was for the gods, for the ancestors. Eating corn was an act of communion, a reaffirmation of origin, a way of remembering that the bones of man were made of sacred dough. The maize gods were numerous. Hunhunapu, young and luminous, died and was reborn like the plant. His story symbolized perpetual renewal. His image was on vessels, sculptures, and temples. Dances, sacrifices, and stories were held in his honor. Maize was more than food. It was time, it was blood, it was essence. Wars were also fought over corn. Control of fertile lands was vital. Without corn, there was no people. Without a harvest, there was no balance. Famines were seen as signs of divine displeasure. Priests had to act. Kings had to explain. Corn dictated the agenda of an entire civilization. Even in times of crisis, when cities fell, stelae were broken, and temples were abandoned, corn continued to be planted. Because as long as a seed could germinate, there was hope. And that was perhaps the reason why the Maya never disappeared. Because as long as corn continues to grow, their people live on. And so, a simple plant became the axis of the universe. For centuries, while cities flourished and temples defied the heavens, the Maya built another legacy, invisible, subtle, but equally colossal. It was the legacy of knowledge. In hidden academies within palaces, in observation courtyards, and in ceremonial centers, one of the most advanced scientific traditions of the ancient world was developed. A science steeped in spirituality, yet rigorously exact. The priest astronomers were the guardians of this wisdom. Their task was not only to observe the skies, but also to interpret and translate them, and translate their patterns into political, ritual, and agricultural decisions. They knew when to sow, when to wage war, when to celebrate, and when to fast. Their authority came not from the sword, but from heaven, and their main tool was the codex. Mayan codices were folding books made of fig bark and covered with white stucco, on which glyphs and symbols were drawn. Each one was a work of art and an encyclopedia. Some were ritual calendars, others astronomical records, and others medical or botanical treatises. The writing was intertwined with the image, creating a narrative that required years to fully understand. Of the hundreds that existed, only 4 authentic codices have survived colonial destruction. The Dresden Codex, for example, is an astronomical marvel. It contains eclipse predictions, Venus tables, and impressive mathematical calculations. It is a testament to a people who, without telescopes, managed to measure the universe with astonishing precision. But beyond its content, the Codex is a symbol of the resilience of knowledge in the face of oblivion. The Mayan sages also mastered mathematics. They used a vigesimal system based on the number 20, and were among the first in the world to utilize the concept of zero. This advancement allowed for a numerical complexity that few contemporary peoples achieved. Calendar dates, astronomical alignments, architectural structures. Everything was calculated in detail. Mayan science was also medicine. They knew hundreds of plants, rudimentary surgical techniques, and purification methods. Health was linked to the soul, the balance of the elements, and the flow of time. Doctors were also priests, inheritors of formulas passed down in whispers and glyphs. And although many of these teachings were destroyed, their traces remain. In the stones, in traditional practices, in rescued codices. Because what is written with true wisdom is never completely erased. In the Mayan world, death wasn't the end, but a transition, a change of plane, a journey into the depths of the universe. They believed that beneath the earth existed a sacred underworld, the dreaded Xibalba, a place of darkness, challenges, and ancestral spirits. But it wasn't a punishing hell. It was a realm of transformation, of rebirth. Entering Xibalba was part of the eternal cycle of life. For the Maya, caves were portals, not simple geological formations, but physical entrances to that other world. There they performed ceremonies, left offerings, and occasionally sacrificed animals and humans to appease the lords of the underworld. The darkness of the cave was the womb of the earth and the echo of the chants, the breath of the gods. There were also cenotes, pools of crystalline water formed by underground rivers. They were mirrors of the soul, places of immersion and connection. Human remains, jewelry, ceramics, and offerings have been found in their depths. Everything indicates that they were pilgrimage sites, where the living communed with the dead. Water wasn't just a vital element, it was liquid memory. Myths told of the exploits of twin heroes who descended to Xibalba to face trials, mock the Dark Lords, and emerge triumphant. These stories were captured in ceramics, codices, and oral history. Each generation knew the path of the twins and understood that in death there was also hope. Mayan burials were elaborately prepared. The bodies were oriented according to the stars. They were accompanied by personal objects, offerings, and sometimes even human sacrifices to accompany the deceased. Rulers were buried in elaborate crypts, surrounded by jade, a symbol of eternal life. Their death was a return to the womb of Mother Earth. The underworld was also represented in architecture. Some pyramids had internal chambers that simulated sacred caves, hidden staircases, narrow passages, hidden altars. Everything was designed to replicate the descent into the depths. For the Mayans, true power came not only from above, but also from what lies beneath our feet. Thus, death was not feared, but understood. The underworld was not a punishment, but an inevitable journey that, if understood, could lead to rebirth. For the forest itself, which gives death and life every day, taught them that everything that falls sprouts again. At the top of the Mayan pantheon shone an ancient, almost ethereal figure, Itzamna, god of the sky, of the day, of wisdom, father of knowledge, creator of glyphs, and first priest. He was credited with the invention of writing, the calendar, medicine, and the organization of the world. His presence was so vast that he didn't need a temple. All it took was a glance at the sky to invoke him. The sages depicted him as an old man with a serene face, infinite eyes, and ageless energy. He was the spiritual guide of the wise, the protector of the scribes, the custodian of cosmic order. Many kings claimed symbolic descent from him. To be touched by Itzamna was to receive the spark of universal understanding. He was believed to dwell high above, beyond the sun, where he wove the destinies of the world alongside his consort, Ixchel, goddess of the moon, childbirth, and emotional tides. Together they formed the balance between reason and feeling, day and night, science and intuition. The union of the two was the foundation of Mayan thought, a holistic, all-encompassing, deeply harmonious vision. In the palace schools, future scribes began their studies by invoking Itzamna. His name was mentioned before every lesson, every codex reading. The words, they said, could only be understood if they were blessed by his spirit. Reading without invoking him was like trying to navigate without a star. The oldest codices bore his symbol, an ancient face with a solar eye and cloudy eyebrows. It was the sign that this knowledge came from the original source. In times of crisis, the wise sought him in the heavens, in eclipses, in the rains, in dreams. Itzamna was wisdom in its purest form, not a god of fire or war, but of ideas, of peace, of deep understanding of the whole. Even today, her figure is recognized in the rituals of some Mayan peoples, not as a distant deity, but as the organizing principle of life. In every grandparent who passes on stories, in every teacher who teaches the language, in every child who asks questions while looking at the stars, Itzamna breathes. Because true wisdom isn't imposed, it's transmitted, and he was the first teacher. The history of the Maya is not only written in temples or codices, it is also hidden in the voices that whisper in the kitchens, in the fields, in the mountains. These are the voices of the people, peasants, midwives, healers, storytellers, musicians, children, men and women who, for generations, have kept alive an oral tradition that escapes books but survives in the collective memory. Language, more than a tool, is a sacred heritage. Today, more than 6 million people speak one of the 30 surviving Mayan languages: Kaiche, Quechua, Yucatec, Tzotzil, Mam, each with its own unique rhythm, poetry, and metaphors. To speak Mayan is to resist. It is to defy centuries of colonization, imposition, and neglect. The tales passed down by grandparents are not simple stories. They are myths, warnings, spiritual maps. Within them live the ancient gods, the heroes who defied death, the animals who spoke with humans. Each night told around the fire is an act of continuity, a prayer disguised
Healers
as a story.
preserve
The knowledge of plants, the cycles of the moon, and the secret prayers revealed only in dreams. They heal not only the body, but also the soul. And each herb, each infusion, carries an ancient legacy. Markets are brimming with ingredients that not only nourish, but also protect, cleanse, and balance. Music, too, is a sacred language. The flutes carved from bone, the drums made of taut leather, the chants in ancestral languages. Each rhythm, an invocation. Each melody, a connection between this world and the others. Music isn't heard, it's felt. And when a people sing in Mayan, they are calling upon their gods. The weaving, the embroidery, the dances, everything communicates. Everything has symbols, colors, coded messages. Women embroider constellations, stories, and lineages on their huipilis. Men carve not just figures, but prayers in wood. It's functional art, beauty with a purpose. Because for the Mayan people, every daily act is an echo of the past, and every word spoken in their language is a promise of the future. In Mayan mythology, animals were not mere creatures. They were spirits, guides, messengers, and among them all, two figures stood out with majestic power: the jaguar and the eagle. One, Lord of the night, of the caves, of the underworld. The other, Master of the sky, of clear vision, of the rising sun. Together, they represented the duality of power, mystery, and wisdom. The jaguar was feared and revered. Its silent footsteps through the undergrowth turned it into a sacred phantasm. Kings dressed in its skin, not out of vanity, but to channel its strength. It was a symbol of the deep night, of hidden power, of transformation. In many Mayan cultures, The jaguar was the form the gods took on their nocturnal visits. Ceremonial masks depicted him with bared fangs and obsidian eyes. In rituals, jaguar warriors danced around the fire, invoking his spirit before going into battle. Being compared to a jaguar wasn't an insult, it was an honor. It meant having the courage to look into the abyss and keep walking. The eagle, for its part, dominated the skies. Its flight was an omen, its gaze, judgment. From high above, it observed the world with distance and clarity. The sages said that the souls of the ancestors flew on its back, crossing the mountains, carrying messages between the worlds. Its cry was a reminder that there are truths that can only be seen from above. In temples, both animals were sculpted facing each other, embracing or fused together. They represented the balance between the hidden and the revealed, between instinctive strength and elevated vision. They were part of the cycle. The jaguar reigned at night, the eagle during the day. Together, they ensured that the world would never fall into chaos. And although their roar and flight are increasingly rare in nature today, they still live on in the hearts of the Mayan people. In dreams, in songs, in names. Every child named Balam or Tohil carries within them a fragment of that ancient power. Because as long as the jaguar and the eagle continue crossing the worlds, the Mayans will continue to wake up at dawn. In the torn pages of time, the names of gods no longer spoken remained. Those spirits who once dominated the altars, prayers, and fears of the Mayan people. Not all were luminous. Some inhabited the twilight, the lightning, the tremor. They were complex, contradictory, profound entities. And although many have been relegated to oblivion, their traces still throb beneath the stone and the skin of the mountain. One of them was Kawil, god of lightning and dynastic power. With his serpent-like leg and flaming torch on his forehead, he was the symbol of the sacred lineage. His image was carved on royal scepters as a reminder that the throne was sustained by fire from heaven. He didn't rule kingdoms, he ruled destinies. There was also Ixtab, the goddess of honorable suicide. Those who, out of love or loss, decided to voluntarily depart to the afterlife turned to her. They weren't condemned. They were received with compassion. In the Mayan world, not every ending was tragic. Some dark paths led to light, and she, the goddess of the knot, was the bridge. The Bakabs, 4 brother gods, held up the heavens from the cardinal points. They were invisible, yet omnipresent. If one fell, the world would shake. They represented the invisible balance, which is not celebrated, but without which everything falls apart. In many villages, offerings are still placed at the 4 corners of a cornfield in their honor, without even knowing their name. Minor gods, such as Ekchua, patron of cacao and merchants, or Apuch, lord of death and decay, were also part of everyday life, each with their own function, their own history, their own place in the wheel of time. There was no absolute good or absolute evil, only order, cycle, the need for everything in its place. Christianity, arriving with the sword, declared many of these gods demons. Their images were destroyed, their temples desecrated, their names forbidden. But the Mayans, astute as ever, hid them. They renamed them. They disguised them as saints, as elements, as children's stories. And so, they survived. Because no god who has been truly loved can be completely forgotten. The nights of the Mayan world were more than darkness. They were open maps, scrolls in motion, celestial codes that sages had learned to read since ancient times. In the firmament, the Mayans found the answers that the earth couldn't offer. Everything was there. The rhythm of the rains, the signal to begin sowing, the omen of an eclipse, the warning of war. The stars were living entities. Venus, in particular, held a sacred place. Its cycle of morning and evening appearance was followed with pinpoint precision. The Maya knew that its presence influenced omens. Many historical events, coronations, sacrifices, invasions, were planned according to its phases. Venus didn't just shine, it spoke. The sun and the moon were also measured with obsessive devotion, not out of curiosity, but for survival. Buildings, altars, and observatories were aligned with the solstices and equinoxes. Temples like Kukulkan at Chichen Itza were designed to create shadow plays depicting a serpent descending from the sky. It was science. It was art. It was faith. Their astronomical tables were impressive. Recorded in codices, they predicted eclipses centuries in advance. And although they didn't have telescopes, their knowledge rivaled modern observatories. They achieved this with patience, observation, and a mathematical logic that drew on the divine. In their world, science and spirituality didn't compete. They embraced each other. The invention of zero, one of the most revolutionary mathematical advances, was essential to these calculations. The number, shaped like a shell, represented both nothingness and everything in waiting. It allowed us to count, but also to think of the universe in cycles. The Mayans knew that time does not advance in a straight line, but in a spiral. Today, Mayan astronomy continues to amaze scientists. Alignments have been discovered that predict climatic phenomena. Some studies suggest they used the sky to measure solar activity and anticipate storms. What began as a ritual eventually became an exact science. Because in every star the Maya contemplated, they planted a question. And today, centuries later, the sky still tries to answer it. The arrival of the conquistadors was an open wound, a brutal fracture in Mayan time. Codices burned, temples destroyed, sages murdered. The cross replaced the calendar, the sword, the ceremonial scepter. And yet, amidst that devastation, the seed of an unexpected hope sprouted: resilience. The Mayan cities did not all fall at once. Some held out for more than 2 centuries. Others were transformed, hiding their rituals under Christian garb. The gods changed names, but not their functions. Ixchel became the Virgin. Itzamna, an invisible but present god. The stelae were buried, to be recovered in better times. During the colonial period, the Mayan peoples were exploited, evangelized, and dispossessed, but they were never completely defeated. Their languages survived. Ritual dances continued at patron saint festivals. Legends were whispered. Every market, every cornfield, every song was an act of resistance. In the following centuries, wars of independence and indigenous rebellions marked new chapters. The caste war in Yucatan was one of the longest and bloodiest indigenous insurrections on the continent. It wasn't just a fight for land. It was a defense of Mayan dignity, an ancient cry that said, "We are still here." Today, Mayan communities face new challenges: poverty, land dispossession, and institutional neglect. But Mayan leaders, artists, scientists, and activists have also emerged, proudly reclaiming their space. They speak their language, teach their history, recover their codices, and reinterpret their myths. The pain exists, but so does hope. Because every child who learns to speak Quiche, every woman who embroiders her story, every young person who records a song in Mayan is healing the wound. And as in every good myth, the end is never defeat, only transformation. In a world where everything seems to be speeding up, the Mayan people still remember how to stop, how to listen to the wind, how to read the rain, how to wait for the right day to sow. They are the guardians of time, not of the clock, but of the sacred calendar, the one that measures not minutes, but meaning. Every community has wise men who still know the holy days, the ancient names, the combinations that open invisible doors. The Tzolk'in calendar is still alive. Spiritual guides consult it before making decisions. Births, weddings, journeys, everything has its exact date. Not because a book says so, but because the cycles dictate it. In Guatemala and Chiapas, These guides, often deep-eyed elders, light circular altars with flowers, candles, and copal. There, they name the days with respect: Kawok, Bats, Ajpu. Each one represents a force, an archetype, a mission. These are not superstitions. They are tools for living in harmony with the cosmos. Rituals aren't spectacles. They're dialogues with the universe, and those who perform them know it. Time, they say, isn't linear. It's like corn. It's born, grows, dies, and is reborn. Each cycle brings lessons, and if one doesn't listen, time repeats itself until it's understood. This knowledge isn't found in museums. It's in the mountains, in the orchards, in the bodies of those who walk respectfully on the earth. It's in the songs at dawn, in the dreams that predict rain, in the stones that still vibrate if you touch them with faith. On a planet wounded by imbalance, the Mayans offer a medicine. Remember. Remember how we lived before time became a commodity. Remember that the future is cultivated, not accelerated. And as long as there are those who listen to the calendar, there will be hope. The history of the Maya doesn't fit into a book. It doesn't end on a date. It doesn't die in a conquest. It's a constant echo, a deep breath that can still be felt in the jungle, in the cities, in the souls of those who have inherited their vision. They are not an extinct people. They are a living civilization. With wounds, yes, but also with strength. Their temples still stand. Not just the stone ones, but the temples of language, of memory, of music, of the sown earth. They are mobile temples, which travel with their people. They sing in the voices of children, which are lit with each candle offered to the ancestors. Many believed the Maya had disappeared. Others said their prophecies heralded the end of the world, but they were wrong. What the Maya heralded wasn't the end, but rather a change, a chance to be reborn, to look back so as not to lose sight of the path forward, a call to awaken, because their legacy isn't ruin, it's teaching, it's vision, it's resilience. They remind us that we can live in harmony with our surroundings, that we can honor the past without being held captive by it, that true power lies not in conquering, but in understanding. Today, the Maya still stand, not as statues, but as people with a future. And every word spoken in their language, every seed planted in the crescent moon, every prayer launched into the night sky is an act of dignity. And as long as their story continues to be told, the Maya will not be a thing of the past. They will be eternal. The history of the Maya is not just a lesson from the past. It is a mirror that reflects who we were, who we are, and who we can still be. It is the testimony of a civilization that, without great global empires or invading armies, left a deeper mark, that of knowledge, balance, respect for the universe, and for life in all its forms. In a world that runs aimlessly, the Maya teach us to walk with purpose. They were guardians of the sky, sages of time, artisans of words and silence. Their legacy is not locked away in glass cases, but breathes in the mountains, in the markets, in the languages still spoken, and in the hearts that still remember. To honor them is to listen to their voice, the one that resonates in the song of a bird, in the sprout of a cornfield, in the murmur of a sacred sea note. They are not gone. They simply await recognition. So, if this story moved you, if you felt that in every word there was an ancient truth that touches the present, we invite you not to leave it here. Subscribe to the channel to continue exploring the roots that still sustain us, the civilizations that continue to beat beyond the dust. Each new piece of content is an opportunity to reconnect with the soul of our history. Share this documentary with those who also seek answers, with those who believe that the past is not a ruin, but a seed. Together, we can rebuild the memory of our peoples, restoring their place in the world's narrative. Activate notifications and join us on upcoming journeys to the heart of other cultures, other stories, other forgotten truths. And if you want to go further, leave us a comment with your reflection, your connection, your vision. What part of this journey left the most impact on you? What ancestral wisdom would you like to rediscover in the present? Your voice is also part of this narrative. This space is yours as much as it is ours. Thank you for joining us this far. Thank you for listening with your heart, for looking with respect, for feeling deeply. This community exists because of you, because there are stories worth telling, and hearts like yours that deserve to hear them. Until our next meeting, which won't be a goodbye, but a new beginning. See you soon, guardian of memory.